don't live in public housing. All of the people that I know today, my mother's friends and extended family who can't live in a decent neighborhood or fix their home. And so it is personal for me to be able to make a difference in the lives of the people who got me where I am today.
Well, in particular, talking about excellence, gives me great pleasure to kind of pose it to Cece, who's kind of done a little bit of it all and been in a couple of administrations. She's one of those we consider, to just be brilliant. But why don't, how did you see where you wanted to go? I mean, you were dean at Princeton, you BA, master's, PhD from Harvard, but you're in an area where when you were going down that road, there were not that many people that you could see that looked like you. So, tell us about that journey and how it applies now to actually chairing the Council of Economic Advisors.
Well, thank you, Cedric. I had never thought of it quite that way, but now I'm going to have to go back and how did I think about it? No, but all kidding aside, I really have to go back to my parents, who always believed in the power of education and who always worked very hard. My father was the first black PhD physicist to get a PhD in physics from Caltech. My mother's father sent all three of his daughters to college at a time when black women didn't go. My parents always believed in hard work and the value of education. And they participated in civil rights. I've got great pictures from DC, right after King gave his speech, et cetera. So they participated in civil rights, but they always encouraged us to set a sight and to stay focused on that site. So I went to Harvard. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I was very interested in solving social problems, very interested. That was, I really wanted to help make the world a better place for everybody. I say that naively, but generally that's what drew me. My mother encouraged me to take a class in economics, and I saw that economics became a tool that one can start to get some purchase on many of the problems that we face. My dad, again, I go back to my dad. He was a researcher, so trying to do that through research came naturally. Yeah, okay, I was, the one black girl in the class. I just never let that get to me. It affected me, but I had my eyes on a bigger prize. I was just really motivated by what I was trying to do. I loved it. And it was that passion and that drive and that feeling like this is what I want to do that has led me here. So I became a professor, but I always wanted to do public policy. So when I had an opportunity to take a leave from Princeton and come and work at the White House, in the Clinton White House, I did. It allowed me to see how policy was actually made, not just thought about. And, the rest just keeps going. So, it's been a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice. The vacations not taken, the weekends spent working. It's great mentors, people who have helped me understand the challenges and not let that get me down, to just pick myself back up and continue forward. And I'll also say there's a lot of luck in there too.
Well, let me, now turn it over to our acting director, but soon-to-be director of management and budget. And I tried to put space in between the ambassador and the soon-to-be director because I just didn't want to just rub it in that we have so many Louisiana people in at the highest level of government. But Director Young is probably the most important person in this room because she controls all of our budgets. Right. Through budgets, and I will say this, people always said if you show me your budget, you're showing me your values. And having an African-American female from the South in a country town for us, highlights our values, that we believe that everyone is talented, but that we have to invest in people so that they can reach their full opportunity and destiny. And so when we look at you, we see that. But, you know, tell me that journey from that country town in Louisiana, like the ambassador, to directing the U.S. budget.
My family went to shop where the ambassador's from, because that was a big town compared to ours. And I didn't know, when I was little, I thought we were rich. We were from big places. I didn't know, you know, that we were of modest means. That's just not how my family operated. We had a lot of self-pride. We owned a store, and my grandmother went to college. Somehow her parents knew that was a pathway. In the 40s, she was on the first women's basketball team at Southern University. So I grew up with a powerhouse. So what I'm doing is just an extension. I'm just doing it in a different place in a different way. So I love what I do, and I never followed money. I followed what I enjoyed doing. I started as a presidential management fellow at the National Institutes of Health, and whenever Congress called, these people called appropriators would call, and the place would shut down. I was like, who are these people? And I need to know them, and I might need to do what they do. So it's also just keeping your ear out for things that interest you. So I went and found a detail opportunity to go to the committee. Loved it. I cried in the bathroom in the Longworth building when I had to go back to NIH. So I would bug the staff director. He's like, when I have a job, I will hire you. Just leave me alone. I watched the elections with the appropriations staff. The Democrats won that election. I was like, what you going to do? So January 2007, I moved from NIH to the Hill. And I loved every second of it. And I got to go from professional staff to running a subcommittee to working on 5 or 6 of the 12 appropriations subcommittees, and then becoming the staff director. And let me tell you, there's no education for an appropriations staffer. What is that? I didn't know what that was. So as CC would say, it was a little luck. But also, if my grandmother would tell you, it was because I was highly favored, as many of you sitting around this table. So I'd like to go through life knowing that a higher power has my back. I don't really worry about a lot. Things tend to work out. But I also know a lot of people who did the right thing and went to college and worked hard, and it did not turn out well for them. So we at this table get to look out for them and do the right things. And the great thing about this job is I get to work with everyone at this table. Usually it's late night phone calls like, I need to do this, and I get to help fix problems. I got to do that on the Hill. I get to do that now. So I really just love what I do, and I love getting to talk about defense in the morning. EPA in the afternoon, the ambassador's peacekeeping arrears somewhere in the middle of the day, and I get to meet people like Cece who give us the larger framework for the economy in which I get to work in, something I didn't pay a lot of attention to till I met her. And so this has just been an honor to get to do this.
And this question kind of gets asked a lot, like, who was that person who really motivated you and inspired you? But I'm going to change it a little bit, because if I have to answer that question, the answer is my grandfather. Nobody out there knows who my grandfather was. But in terms of a public figure who you could see yourself in, or somebody that you said, you know what, I want to break the mold like that person. I want to be like that person. For me, you know, I went to Morehouse because that's where Dr. King went, and that's where strong black men went. So that's where my brother and I went. My mom and dad were HBCU grads, Southern University, but I needed to get away from home. But so, Marcia, you know, you offered yourself up for public service. You actually put your name on a ballot and had to run. That is a lot different than most people realize, because when you put your name on the ballot, you actually find out how people think about you. But to take all of those steps and risk, who was it that really kind of pushed you so that, one, you knew you could do it, but two, kind of some footsteps you thought you might want to walk in and further?
If I probably had to pick one person, it would probably be Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan, in my opinion, was one of the greatest lawyers in the history of this country. She understood who we were as a people. She also understood the Constitution and where we ought to be. I became a lawyer because of Barbara Jordan. I became an elected official because of Barbara Jordan. I think that if there is any single, because I'm like you, I would have said my grandmother. But I'm like you in terms of a person who captured who we are and made us proud every time she opened her mouth.
And Cece, you know, just judging from your first answer, I would say, you know, your father, your mother, but your father inspired you to look at the research side and do all of that. But if there was a public figure or two that, you know, inspired you and you said, you know what, I could see myself doing that, was there anybody that, you know, just comes to mind?
So I can't think back so far to public figure when I was coming up. But more recently, Dr. Ruth Simmons has been somebody who really inspires me. So she was one part of the team that hired me at Princeton, and she's just so smart, so humble. She's been on to be college president at 3 institutions, the first black president of an Ivy League institution, now giving back in Texas. And she's just so smart, so wise, so warm and considerate, and just so believes in what she's doing that I find her truly inspirational.
And I guess, you know, in my world, Secretary, you know, we would grow up and we would want to fight and do all of those things, but you actually did it. And because you did it, we're a much better country and we enjoy the freedoms that we do have. But either at West Point or you know, besides not wanting to be a lawyer, which Marsha and I went on to do, was there someone that you thought really provided a service and risked it all for this country, and you just saw yourself getting there and doing that?
Yeah, if you will allow me to make one comment up front.
You are a general,
Yeah.
and you're about 6'4".
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want.
So Cedric, I got to tell you, and I know all of these great people very, very well. The display of humility in this room is striking. And I can tell you that it's genuine because I do know these people, but it's striking. And it's not what you would expect, what you would think, but people who have achieved so much. But the common themes that you hear are do things that you love to do, that you can be passionate about. And the supportive family piece, I think, is also very striking. Because if you'd asked me the question that you asked Marsha, I would have said the same thing. It's that family that picked you up and dusted you off. I have had a number of role models along the way, but initially the first tough thing I had to do, Cedric, was to go to West Point and finish and be successful. So one of my initial role model was Henry O. Flipper. He's the first African American to graduate from West Point. He's also from the same hometown that I'm from, in Thomasville, Georgia. And the things that he had to go through in order to graduate and become an officer in the Army, sacrifices that he made, were just extraordinary. And I felt that if he could do that in that day and age, surely I could be successful as well. And so I think he was a great role model for me. Along the way, I had other role models that mentored and helped me, but initially it was him. So.
Well, let's shift a little bit, because it's one thing to be there, and it's one thing to have black people at the top levels of government, but unless it's making a real difference, then it doesn't matter. And so I would shift to you, Administrator Regan, when we, especially this administration, which we haven't talked about the president much, but to have a president who is so focused on equity and inclusion, not afraid to say the word systemic racism or all of the other things that we talk about. And so you are charged with doing some pretty amazing things. And so the question becomes, with your task and some of these big roles from the infrastructure bill and others, why it's important to have black people at the top levels of government.
You know, I think the representation is so important, partially because of an answer that Marcia gave earlier, which is, for her, it's personal. For me, it's personal. I've had to reach for an inhaler on a high pollution day, and I understand how it feels to try to get that breath. I think many of us have relatives and friends that live in homes in areas where they question the quality of their drinking water. And these are basic rights. Everyone in this country, especially every child in this country, deserves clean air to breathe and safe water to drink. So this is personal. And because I've had experiences and because I understand the challenges, and then when we look at the statistics and understand that our communities are disproportionately bearing the brunt of past transgressions, it fits in very well with the president's theme of equity, justice, and inclusion. And I firmly believe that if we create a rising tide that lifts all boats, then this country can be all that it's supposed to be. And so black leadership is extremely important. Diverse leadership is extremely important because this is a democracy. And in order for a democracy to work, its leadership should reflect the people that it represents.
Well, and how excited are you going to be able to say that you're the person, you're the man that removed 10 million lead pipes from homes that distribute contaminated drinking water? 400,000 schools are going to be much better schools because you were there and you saw it through. And it was the vision, I would say, of this entire cabinet, but it's a lot of responsibility, but I'm sure it's great joy to know that something that should have never happened, but should have been fixed a long time ago, as we look at Flint and other places, but you're going to be that person to actually get it done.
It's a labor of love, and thanks to the president's leadership and partnership with Congress, we've got billions of dollars to replace these lead pipes, and we know that there is absolutely no acceptable level of lead for an adult or for a child. We also know that black children living at or below poverty are 4 times more likely to have elevated levels of lead in their systems, which we know can be debilitating and impacts the ability to pay attention, to excel in education. And you just see a domino effect in terms of their contributions to society or lack of contribution to society. And so this is extremely important. The president, his leadership starts at the top. And once he gave all of us the green light to pursue fairness, equity, justice, and inclusion, then the game was on. And we have an awesome opportunity right now to change the lives of people all across this country in all of the positions that we serve.
Well, Secretary Fudge, speaking of getting the charge, you actually got an executive order the first week that the president signed that said that you had the charge of rooting out systemic racism in housing. And what the administrator just said, talking about our kids who live in poverty, we know the greatest way to transfer wealth from generation to generation and create wealth is home ownership. And for too many people, that part of the American dream was blocked out. And now, as the person over housing and urban development for all of the country, how do you take that charge, and what have you been able to accomplish so far?
I tell you, Cedric, I take great pride in talking about the president when I'm out and about, and I travel a lot, as you know. I take great pride in the fact that first he recognized it. Secondly, that he empowered me to do it. And so what you're going to see over the next couple of weeks is a report that we're doing on the bias in the appraisal process across this country. It is going to be striking and shine a light that people have only talked about and thought about. We're going to show it. We have created an environment in which students now and those who are just able to pay their rent, and we know they can pay a mortgage, but they don't have a down payment. So we're now giving down payment assistance. Black people systematically have been kept out of the credit process because of student debt. We're recalculating student debt so that it is no longer an impediment to get a home. We are as well doing what we call small dollar loans, which has historically been how we've kept black people out of the market, redlining, which we still do today. So we are addressing that. We are doing everything that the president has asked me to do. I don't know if he knows I'm doing half this stuff, but I know he's going to be supportive of it because it makes a difference, and I know his heart and his mind is in the right place.
Cece, despite the pandemic and everything else in terms of the economics in this country, we've made some real big gains this year, and it's not in a small part, but in a very large part, to you and your team and the advice and the president and you all's execution. How do you look at that and then look at it through a lens of equity when we talk about all of the things we were able to do? And some of the things in terms of cutting black poverty have been really, really phenomenal. But a lot of people don't know. So we'll take this time to just remind people, you know, where we were when you got here, where we are now, where we were when the president got here, where we are now, and what we've been able to do to move the needle.
Yeah, sure. Well, we know that the year that the president took office, so we're going back to 2021, when the president came into office, the economy was creating something 50, 60,000 jobs a month. In December, it had actually lost employment. During the president's tenure, there have been 6.6 million jobs created. Unemployment has come down the fastest in history since in this past year. We've seen child poverty cut almost in half, and especially for black children and children of color. So this economy has come roaring back, in no small thanks to the American Rescue Plan, which first and foremost have provided the resources to address the pandemic. That's the vaccines, the development, getting them, not the development, but getting them distributed, which is most important, getting shots in arms. Then, we have the resources now to be getting the masking and the therapeutics and to continue with the boosters and to look forward. That has been so important because we can see that the economy follows this virus. But it also provided the support for families and businesses to continue operating throughout this year. So this has been a tremendous year in terms of the strength of the economy. We've had the fastest growth in almost 40 years. We're leading our peers. Okay, so we've got, I'm just going to say it, we got the Consumer Price Index results today. We know that there are challenges that remain, and these challenges are particularly difficult for families of color, for black families. We've seen larger wage growth, for lower wage workers, but nonetheless, we know that these price increases are a challenge. So the president is focused on that too. He's focused on it, in terms of trying to find ways to help get the market back in shape. So his efforts on the supply chain and the ports and helping to get people back to work. Also understand that this is the purview of the Federal Reserve, and he respects that. But really importantly, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which will help remove the lead pipes and make so many important investments, is critical to growing our economy and tilting some of those benefits to communities of color. And we really do need in the Build Back Better plan, the elements there, which is the child tax credit, which helped reduce child poverty, The investments in education, including the HBCUs and minority-serving institutions and tribal colleges and universities, are so important. That the care economy, helping to ensure that those, particularly women and women of color, are paid fairly, so that those we love are being taken care of. Those are investments that the president is also very focused on, which will help our communities as well. So it's been a great year. We know there are challenges that remain, and there's more work to be done.
And I think part of that question about having people at the top that makes a difference. When we came in, we inherited a PPP plan that we passed in Congress, that the big companies came in and sucked up all the money. And part of this administration, with the president's leadership or with advisors in a cabinet that looks like this, we were able to level the playing field for those small mom and pop businesses, those minority-owned businesses. And when we talk about the infrastructure bill, because of people around this table, how important we think this is, we put it in an infrastructure bill, but we made the Minority Business Development Agency permanent in the infrastructure bill, made the director of it Senate confirmed, and seated it with about $110 million, because we know how important those small businesses and black businesses are to communities. But Ambassador, my question to you is, how do we tie this? Because you play in a space that many of us don't pay attention as much, because, like my mother said, I'm so busy trying to keep a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and food on the table. I am absolutely not paying that much attention to what's happening outside of my neighborhood, my city, my state, much less outside the country. You have the awesome task of managing relations for this country with the world. And as a black woman, I know that that is an awesome job responsibility, but one that you do amazingly well. How does that tie into, one, Black America, and two, just where we are going forward?
I thank you for that question, and it's really an important question, because the challenge that I have is not building the relationships. The challenge that I have is making sure that I am pursuing a foreign policy for America that addresses the needs of the American people. So the president established 4 goals when he came on board: dealing with the pandemic, dealing with climate change, dealing with issues of racial inequities and racial justice, and economic recovery. And these are all issues that are important on the international stage that impact everyday Americans. And so I have tackled all of those issues as the ambassador to the United Nations, in terms of making sure that our COVID response has been broad, has been known. So when I travel overseas, I always make sure that I am there to receive COVID vaccines that the United States is contributing, because we know that we cannot address this pandemic here in the United States if we don't address the issues overseas. When I'm overseas, we talk about climate change and the impact of climate, and what we can do and what other countries can do that will help improve our climate for our environment for the globe. We talk about issues of racial justice, and that is extremely important for me, because it's an issue where people think we are weak. And so they think they can criticize us on racial justice issues. And so I have been very, very clear. We do have issues. I can acknowledge those issues. The vast majority of other people don't acknowledge their problems. I don't think China would acknowledge that they have huge human rights violations taking place in China. I can acknowledge U.S. weaknesses, but also talk about what we've done to accomplish dealing with those issues, including having us around the table. And then the issues of economic recovery. The pandemic has had an impact on the entire global economy, and that economy is very connected to our economy. So how we address economic issues around the globe are important to how we address economic issues here. And getting that message out to the American people that you need to care about foreign policy, you need to care about what we do when we are representing you overseas has been an extraordinarily challenging part of my job, but it's been the part of my job that I take the most seriously since I have been in New York.
No, and as you speak, you remind us that especially Cece and I probably see it here and talk about it a lot more, and that's those supply chain issues that are raising costs for people here in America because we're coming out of this pandemic strong, but everybody around the world is not. And so if factories are closing around the world that we get our goods and supplies from, then it is decreasing that supply, and because of the demand, prices are going up a little bit. But, you know, also, I will just tell you this, and it's not a part of Black History Month, it's part of who I am. You find out how people, you know, care about you and how much they value you when you're down and out. And after Katrina, we saw how people really saw us. But there is a sense of profiteering going on during this pandemic too, and it's something that the administration is trying to address because we believe that this is a country where we're better when we bring people together and we help people when they get knocked down. But speaking of people getting knocked down and helping them, to the woman with all the money in the country. You don't print it, you just spend it. So, you know, point to some areas that we're doing some really good stuff that other people have not done, but we're doing it in terms of equity. And so whether it's community violence intervention that we want to put in Build Back Better and those things. But I think that that's one of the examples of things that this administration that is doing specifically aimed at communities of color to fix barriers and issues that are there, and we can think of education in other areas. But since you're the one that spends all the money, why don't you?
Well, one thing of importance to me, and you just hinted at one thing that colors it for me, is disaster response. So Cedric probably remembers this. You remember this, Ambassador. Growing up, we had hurricane trackers. You watch the news, and you learn how to be young meteorologists growing up in South Louisiana. So that colors, you know, who you become. And on the Hill, I remember joining the Appropriations Committee. I thought I'd work on health funding issues. And the staff director at the time was like, "You from Louisiana, why don't you go do FEMA?" It's like, "I don't want to do FEMA." He was like, "But we're still recovering from Katrina. Go help it." And it turned out to be a great thing for me and something I continue to look at. I remember one instance, this administration took decisive action. Remember, some of our communities don't always have paperwork and titles. You pass it from family member to family member, and that has been a historic barrier to getting disaster aid. So these families who don't have the right paperwork, but you know it's been in this family, in the Coleman and the Matthews family for 100 years, but yet and still they could not get a tarp on their roof because they did not have the proper paperwork. This administration saw that, fixed it, got ahead of it. We still have a lot more work to do. But those communities, and especially thinking back on Katrina, suffered mightily. And sometimes disaster response did not meet the challenge, especially for communities of color who take a disproportionate share. So we're doing more resilience here in Congress. The two former Congress people passed bills that allowed us to spend on something we call the BRIC program. So we've now, as an administration, implemented that to spend billions of dollars in communities so we don't have the same destruction we had in past storms. And guess what? The climate is changing. And we see that in wildfires. We see that in the intensity of these storms. These 100-year storms are now becoming every few years. So, and disaster response is something important to me, probably because of where I'm from, and also recognizing that our communities didn't always get the same response that others did. So that's something, it matters who is making the decisions there, and I hope to be a part of that solution. And Secretary Fudge has a big role in how we handle housing after disasters. And you're right, the Community Violence Initiative, that is something new from this president. Our communities disproportionately have a share of violence in neighborhoods. So our proposal not only looks at the justice side, but also the social services side. What can we do? What can we invest in to make sure that we take preventative measures so we don't have to engage the Department of Justice and police side of the equation? So you see the equal resources in Health and Human Services as you do in the Department of Justice. So those are the things where budgets matter. Your budget is your values. This president always says that. And we are trying to do that through the budgets we put out in his name.
Well, I think that's why it's so important that you're there, because you come from these communities, and we know that policing is not the only answer that's out there, that we have to deal with the root causes, one, and just like when you look at mental health, we have to look at the reason that you need to mask the pain and the trauma and all of those things. But one thing, and I get to pick on you because you're one of the newest mothers in the White House, but one of the things that the Vice President has taken the lead on and this administration has focused on is maternal health. The fact that black women die disproportionately, about twice as much as their white counterparts in childbirth. And if you look at Native American women, it's worse than that. And so that's why having people with different life experiences and what they bring to the table is so important. So I'll just kind of give everybody just a chance to wrap up with their thoughts of, you know, it might have been one of Dr. King's last books, but the sentiment is the same, which is where do we go from here? And what are those things that we need to drive on, but, you know, what are those accomplishments you still want to have? General, I am terrified to ask you that question in terms of where do we go from here. We will. You can answer that in as broad terms as you possibly can, and then we'll just go around.
Well, thanks, Cedric, and thanks for doing this. Again, this has been a great session, and I truly feel that I could stay in this room with this group for the next 5 hours and still be thirsting for more about them and about their past. Where do we go from here? One of my goals, my major goal coming into this job, Cedric, is I'm honored to be, you know, the first African-American Secretary of Defense, the 28th Secretary of Defense, but I really don't want to be the last African-American Secretary of Defense. And so I want to make sure that I create the conditions that, you know, young people out there that are looking at this video can really relate and say, I could be him, or I could, you know, I can be very, very successful in a Department of Defense if that's, you know, if that's what I choose to do. As you know, what I think about every day, 24 hours a day, is defending this country. I have a great team that's with me, that helps me do the things that we need to do. But I think, again, as I do that, you know, one of the things I want to do is make sure that I create as an inclusive environment as possible. You know, diversity is really important to us, and I think the military has led the way in a lot of cases with respect to diversity. I got to make sure that we continue to make strides, and I equate diversity being to being invited to the dance. Inclusion is actually being asked to dance. So just because you're a diverse organization doesn't mean that you're actually inclusive. Doesn't mean that people feel that they're a part of the organization, that they're welcome. And so one of my goals is to make sure that we have that environment that's not only diverse in the ranks, but diverse in the leadership and inclusive as well. And then one final comment, I would just make the point that I believe this cabinet is very inclusive. Every time that I'm with the cabinet members, I've always felt welcome and always felt, you know, that I was with teammates that I could work with and trust and count on. So I'll stop there.
Well, Shalonda, besides passing the budget,
Well, since you brought up my daughter, and I will admit I don't talk about it much because my hormones are still elevated, and I look at her and I want to cry every time because I can't believe she is here. But where we go is now colored by what I see in her future. And, you know, I really like to not have to give the speech. I think many of us probably got at this table that you have to be better. She should be able to work as hard as anyone else. She shouldn't have to be better than someone else just to be given a shot. I really hope I don't have to give her that speech. I do have certain expectations for her, but there's nothing. She doesn't need to be better. She has to do, she has to be herself. So I have a lot of hopes for her future, and mostly I see through her. I hope she's not impressed by anything that I do, and my guess is she won't be. But because I want this to be normal for her, and for this not to be an exception to the rule, but something she sees as normal. When COVID is a little bit more regulated, I look forward to her, getting to meet all of these lovely cabinet members and knowing that this is a regular course of action. And I'll say, you didn't ask me who I looked up to. Mine came later in life. Michelle Obama just seeing her in this White House was such a big deal to me, and just meant a lot to me. Even though I was well in my 20s in my career, she was just the epitome, and she took a lot of flack for just being herself. From the south side of Chicago, she felt a lot like the people I grew up around. So I hope the future, that isn't an exception to the rule, but something our children are used to seeing.
Well, I'm being told we have to wrap, but on that, I will say that this administration will not stop, and in the next 10 weeks, 3 or 4 months, we're going to have and get confirmed the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court. She's going to be the best legal mind. She's going to be one of the best on the court. And we are proud of that moment. And we're just as proud of this cabinet. And we don't get to ask a whole bunch of questions, but the next time we're together, I want to know how it feels to walk through the airport with detailed security, and people say, "Who's that? What do they do?" So look, thank you all. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our Black History Month roundtable that we're having. But just know, and I would just encourage you to go research these great individuals and do the research on African Americans' contribution to this country, because if you look at it, this country would not be what it is, from the light bulb to everything else. So thank you all, and thanks for coming in and hanging out in public housing. Marsha.
Thank you, Cedric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.